When I saw that expensive car stranded on the highway shoulder during the worst thunderstorm Atlanta had seen in years, my Army Ranger training kicked in, and I knew I couldn't just drive past someone in danger. Claire was shivering in her evening dress, her BMW completely dead with no cell service, trying to get to her father's military ceremony. As a former soldier myself, I understood the importance of family military events, so I gave her a ride to safety, even though it made me late for my last delivery. The next morning, when that Black Hawk helicopter landed in the field beside my delivery van and General Harrison introduced himself as Claire's father, I realized that sometimes helping a stranger can change your entire life in ways you never imagined. Hi everyone, welcome to Life's Changing Stories. Now, let's dive into today's story. The Georgia sky had been building towards something dangerous all afternoon, with dark clouds rolling across the Atlanta suburbs like an advancing army, while Tony Mitchell finished his delivery route through neighborhoods where the houses cost more than he'd make in 5 years driving for express logistics. At 34, Tony had been working as a delivery driver for 3 years since leaving the Army Rangers, a job that paid enough to cover rent on his small apartment and keep his 15-year-old Honda running, but left little room for the kind of financial breathing space he'd dreamed about during his 8 years of military service overseas. The transition from elite military operations to civilian delivery work hadn't been easy for Tony, who'd spent his Army career leading reconnaissance missions in Afghanistan and coordinating complex logistics under pressure that made civilian problems seem manageable, but somehow less meaningful. While his Ranger buddies had landed high-paying security contracts with private military companies, Tony had chosen the quieter path of helping ordinary people receive their packages, finding purpose in the small, daily interactions that reminded him why he'd served his country in the first place. As the first raindrops began hitting his windshield during what should have been his final delivery of the day, Tony checked his GPS and realized he was still 40 minutes from completing his route, with the storm intensifying by the minute and visibility dropping to dangerous levels. Most drivers would have called it quits and rescheduled the remaining deliveries, but Tony's military training had taught him that missions were completed regardless of conditions, and he wasn't about to let a thunderstorm prevent him from doing his job. What Tony didn't know was that his commitment to completing every delivery, combined with the never leave anyone behind mentality that had been drilled into him during Ranger training, was about to transform a routine evening into the most important night of his life, when helping a stranger in distress would connect him to people who could change his financial future and restore his faith in the power of simple human kindness. The storm that was making his job more difficult was about to become the catalyst for the most unexpected reward he'd ever received. Tony Mitchell gripped the steering wheel of his Honda delivery van as the storm intensified around him, transforming the usually busy Georgia highways into a treacherous maze of poor visibility and flooding water. At 34, Tony had been working for Express Logistics for 3 years since leaving the Army Rangers, a job that provided steady income but left him constantly worried about making ends meet. Tony's military service had shaped his approach to civilian life in ways that sometimes puzzled his co-workers and supervisors. While other drivers might cut corners or skip difficult deliveries, Tony treated every package like a critical mission that required completion regardless of obstacles or inconvenience. His 8 years as an Army Ranger had taught him the meaning of never leave anyone behind, and that philosophy extended to his delivery work, where he would spend extra time helping elderly customers carry packages inside, cover deliveries during bad weather to protect them from damage, and work additional hours to ensure nothing was left undelivered. Despite difficult economic times, Express Logistics had downsized twice in the past year, reducing Tony's hours and pay. He never complained, remembering the military teaching that tough times don't last, but tough people do. His colleagues knew him by his white delivery van and his reputation for reliability, even when it cost him personally. The storm that was now pounding his windshield represented exactly the kind of challenge that separated committed drivers from those who were simply putting in time. Most of Tony's co-workers would have returned to the depot and rescheduled the remaining deliveries for better weather, but Tony was determined to complete his route. As he navigated through the worst visibility he had experienced since leaving the military, Tony noticed the blinking hazard lights of an expensive-looking BMW stranded on the highway's shoulder. Through the rain, he could see a figure in the driver's seat, someone who appeared to be in distress. Tony's ranger instincts immediately kicked in. Despite being behind schedule and facing dangerous driving conditions, he couldn't leave someone stranded in such a severe storm. He pulled his van over behind the BMW, grabbed his rain jacket, and approached the disabled vehicle. Inside the car was a young woman in an elegant evening dress, looking cold, frightened, and completely out of place in the middle of a thunderstorm on a deserted highway. Tony tapped gently on her window, and she cautiously lowered it a few inches. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Tony asked, his voice carrying the calm authority he had developed during military service. "Looks like you're having some car trouble." The woman, who appeared to be in her late 20s, looked relieved to see someone willing to help. "My car just died completely, and I can't get any cell service out here. I'm supposed to be somewhere really important tonight." Tony assessed the situation quickly. The BMW was clearly not going to restart, and leaving someone stranded in this storm was not an option. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll get you taken care of. Let me push your car to a safer spot off the road, and then I can give you a ride wherever you need to go." The woman, who introduced herself as Claire, initially hesitated to accept help from a stranger, but Tony's professional demeanor and obvious concern for her safety convinced her to trust him. Tony used his van to carefully push Claire's BMW to a safer location further off the highway, then helped her gather her purse and overnight bag before she climbed into his delivery van. He cranked up the heat and offered her a towel from his emergency supplies as she shivered from the cold rain. "I'm Tony Mitchell," he said as they began driving. "Where do you need to get to?" "Claire Harrison," she replied gratefully. "I'm trying to get to Fort Gordon. My father is having his military retirement ceremony tomorrow morning, and I was supposed to be there tonight for the family dinner." Tony felt an immediate connection. "Your father's army. I'm former Rangers, different units, same family. We'll make sure you get there." As they drove through the storm, Claire explained that her father was a helicopter pilot who had served for 30 years, and this retirement ceremony represented the culmination of his entire military career. Missing the family gathering would devastate both of them. Tony understood the significance of military ceremonies and the importance of family support during major career transitions. He had missed too many important moments with his own family during his years of deployment, and he was determined to help Claire avoid that regret. They arrived at a small roadside motel near Fort Gordon, where Claire could safely spend the night and easily reach the base for her father's ceremony the next morning. When Claire offered to pay Tony for his help, he refused. "It's not necessary, Mom. I was heading this direction anyway, and helping a fellow service member's family is just what we do." Tony left Claire to rest and continued to his final delivery, reflecting that helping someone in genuine need made the long, difficult night worthwhile, even though the detour had put him significantly behind schedule. Tony was 30 minutes late, completing his delivery route, and he had received a pointed message from his supervisor about punctuality. He hated being late. It went against everything his military training had taught him about reliability and professionalism. But he couldn't have left Claire stranded in that storm. He sent an apologetic text to his boss and pushed through the remaining bad roads, trying to make up time, while knowing that repeated late deliveries could cost him his job. Tony understood that sometimes doing the right thing meant taking a personal hit, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to prioritize his schedule over someone's safety. The storm had cleared by the next morning, leaving behind the kind of crystal-clear Georgia sky that made the previous night's danger seem like a distant memory. Tony was back on his normal delivery route, grateful for good weather and hoping to make up for the previous evening's delays. As he parked his van to make a delivery in a rural area near Fort Gordon, Tony heard the distinctive rhythmic sound of helicopter rotors. But these sounded much closer and different from the usual military training flights he occasionally heard in the area. Tony looked up to see a Black Hawk helicopter flying low and slow, clearly preparing to land in the open field directly beside his parked van. This was highly unusual. Military helicopters didn't typically land in civilian areas without specific authorization and compelling reasons. As the helicopter touched down, Tony watched in amazement as two figures emerged. A man in army dress uniform with the bearing of a senior officer, and Clare, the woman he had helped the previous night. Clare pointed toward Tony as she and the officer approached his van. The man in uniform extended his hand with a warm smile. "You must be Tony," the officer said. "My daughter told me what you did for her last night. I can't thank you enough." Tony shook the man's hand, still processing the surreal situation. "It was nothing, sir. Just doing what anyone would do." The officer's expression grew more serious. "No, son, it wasn't nothing. You went above and beyond to help someone you didn't know, in dangerous conditions, even though it cost you personally. You Rangers are something else. Never leave anyone behind, right?" Tony nodded, recognizing the motto that had guided his military service and continued to influence his civilian choices. The officer reached into his uniform and pulled out a brown envelope. "I'm General William Harrison, and because of your kindness, Claire made it to the base in time for our family dinner before my final flight. After 30 years of service, having my daughter there for my last official ceremony meant everything to me. This is a debt I can never fully repay." General Harrison handed Tony the envelope, which contained a substantial amount of cash, more money than Tony typically saw in several months of delivery work. "Sir, this is too much," Tony stammered, overwhelmed by the unexpected generosity. "I can't accept this." "You can, and you will," General Harrison replied firmly. "What you did represents the best of military values in civilian life. You saw someone in need and acted without hesitation, even though it cost you personally. That's the kind of character this country needs more of." General Harrison's expression grew thoughtful. "You know, this helicopter flight is one of my last official duties before retirement. Your act of kindness reminded me of what truly matters. Not the missions or the politics, but the human connections we make when we choose to help each other." Claire stepped forward and hugged Tony. "Thank you for saving me from that storm. I'll never forget your kindness." As the helicopter prepared to depart, General Harrison shook Tony's hand one final time. "Use this money wisely, son, and remember that your service to others didn't end when you left the Rangers. It just took a different form." Over the following weeks, the money from General Harrison cleared Tony's debts and gave him breathing room for the first time since leaving the military. He was able to reduce his working hours, pursue some training opportunities, and even consider starting his own delivery business. More importantly, Tony had learned that his commitment to helping others, the same commitment that had driven his military service, continued to have value and impact in civilian life. The money was life-changing, but the recognition that his character and values mattered was even more significant. Tony began volunteering with veteran support organizations, using his delivery routes to check on elderly veterans who lived alone, and finding ways to serve his community that honored his military training while building the kind of life he wanted outside the service. The encounter with Clare and General Harrison had taught Tony that sometimes a single act of kindness can change your entire trajectory, not because of any material reward, but because it connects you to people who recognize and value your character. Tony kept General Harrison's business card and occasionally sent updates about his life and work, maintaining the connection that had started with a storm and a stranded BMW. The general's response always emphasized the same message: that true service continues long after uniforms are put away, and that helping others is both a privilege and a responsibility. Years later, when Tony would tell the story to young veterans struggling with the transition to civilian life, he would emphasize that the most important lesson wasn't about the money, it was about staying true to the values that had made them good soldiers, even when those values seemed to have no practical benefit in civilian life. The storm that had made Tony's job more difficult had actually been the catalyst for the most important night of his post-military life, proving that challenges often contain opportunities we can't see until we choose to help others despite our own difficulties. Tony's willingness to risk his job and personal convenience to help a stranger had connected him to people who could change his life. But more importantly, it had confirmed that the principles he had learned in the Rangers, loyalty, integrity, and never leaving anyone behind, were just as valuable on civilian highways as they had been on military operations overseas. The Black Hawk helicopter landing in that Georgia field had been dramatic, but the real transformation had happened the night before, when Tony had chosen kindness over convenience and service over self-interest, proving that heroism often looks like ordinary people doing the right thing when no one is watching and no reward is expected. General Harrison's gift had provided financial relief, but his recognition of Tony's character had provided something more valuable: confirmation that military values translate into civilian virtue, and that true service never ends. It just finds new forms and new opportunities to make a difference in the lives of others. Tony's story became a reminder that we never know how our actions might impact others, and that the decision to help someone in need often reveals more about our own character than it does about our circumstances. Sometimes the storms that seem to make our lives more difficult are actually opportunities to discover the power of compassion and the unexpected connections that can transform everything we thought we knew about our own potential and purpose. We hope you enjoyed today's story of love, life, and betrayal. For more free stories and entertainment from our channel, please hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe with notifications.